dedicate. I just want to dedicate the shir in memory of my mother, Aleha Shalom. She, her yard site is this Thursday. And if there's time at the end of the shir, I'll talk a little bit about her. Now, excuse me, today, the yard site is today. I'm sorry, Tisha is Thursday. The yard site is today. Her yard site is today, and Tisha B'Av is Thursday. So I'm going to speak about Tisha B'Av. Now, one of the peculiarities of Tisha B'Av, even though Tisha B'Av is perhaps identified as the saddest day of the year on the Jewish calendar, but nevertheless, we do not recite Tachanun on Tisha B'Av. And the question is, why don't we recite Tachanun on Tisha B'Av? My uncle discusses it, but I want to discuss the opinion of the Mefarshim who say that because Ikri Moed, Tisha B'Av is referred to in Eicha as a Moed, as set time, but the word Moed also is used when talking about a holiday. So we have to understand, why should Tisha B'Av be considered a holiday? In other words, besides being a day of mourning, as it manifests itself primarily Tisha B'Av at night and Tisha B'Av in the morning, and as a day of tzedakah, as it manifests a day of crying out to God for help, as it manifests itself at mincha time. Tisha B'Av is called a holiday. Why should it be called a holiday? So it's true, the word moed is used, but we have to understand why. Why should we interpret the word moed not just as a set date, a set time, but moed to mean a holiday? Now, a person could suggest, because it's brought down in Zcharia, Tzom Reviv, it's Tzom HaChamishi, it's Tzom HaShvi, it's Tzom HaAsiri. Yeh lebeis Yehuda l'soson l'simcha l'moedim tovim, aval emes v'ashalom ahavu. That at the end of days, when Mashiach comes, and according to some poskim, this was true even during the time of Bayesheni, Tisha B'Av and the other fast days were considered holidays, or moedim tovim. But if that's the case, so why is it only Tisha B'Av that is referred to as a moed, that is considered only a holiday, whereas the other fast days are not considered holidays? After all, when Mashiach comes, all the fast days, Shavuot, Shabbat Tammuz, Tisha B'Av, Tzom Gedalia, Asar B'Teves, will all be holidays. But it's obvious that while the others will be holidays when Mashiach comes, Tisha B'Av, from a certain perspective, is considered a holiday now. And the question is, why should Tisha B'Av be considered as a holiday now? Now, many years ago, when the Lubavitcher Rebbe Zatzal was sitting shiva for his wife, my father Zatzal went to Menachem Avlehem, and they discussed many inyanim. It had to do with the shiva at that time, also about the mitzvah of tzedakah came up, and that there is a mitzvah of tzedakah for a cotton. It's not just chinuch, but there is a mitzvah tzedakah. But in the process, when my father began, when the Hamocham Yenachem, when the discussion centered, actually that was the beginning of the discussion, when they were talking about the concept of Nechama Hamocham Yenachem, my father mentioned to the Lubavitcher Rebbe the thought from Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Reb Chaim Volozhiner says, regarding, I've mentioned this before, regarding the end of the Gemara in Tainis, Kol Misabel al Yerushalayim, whoever is Misabel in Yerushalayim, Zoche Beroa B'Nechamasa, he merits and sees in the Nechama of Yerushalayim. He merits and sees in the consolation of Yerushalayim. And Reb Chaim Volozhin was troubled. Why does it say Zoche Beroa B'Nechamasa? He merits and sees in the present tense. It should have said Yiskeh. He will merit the year and he will see B'Nechamas Yerushalayim, in the consolation of Yerushalayim. And Reb Chaim Volozhin has said that when it says Zoche Beroa B'Nechamasa, when you misabel Yerushalayim, you see right now in the consolation of Yerushalayim. The Lubavitcher Rebbe understood, and rightfully so, that it's talking about the Beis Hamikdash Lamala, the Beis Hamikdash in heaven. We know Reb Chaim Volozhin points it out, but it's certainly accepted among the Mekubalim that there is a Beis Hamikdash Lamala and there's a Beis Hamikdash Lamata. There's a Beis Hamikdash in heaven, and there's a Beis Hamikdash down below on earth. And before the Beis Hamikdash could be destroyed by the Babylonians and the Romans, the Jewish people had to destroy the Beis Hamikdash Lamala, the Beis Hamikdash up in heaven. The Beis Hamikdash up in heaven was not destroyed with fire, but the Beis Hamikdash in heaven was destroyed with sins. And so the Lubavitcher Rebbe suggested, and I'm sure that was certainly to include it in what Reb Chaim Volozhin said, Zoche Beroa B'Nechamasa, you have the consolation. Because when we're misabel on Yerushalayim, when we mourn over Jerusalem, so we are building the Beis Hamikdash in heaven, which upon its completion will give us the ability to build the Beis Hamikdash Lamata, the Beis Hamikdash down here on earth. And perhaps, according to Rashi's opinion, the Beis Hamikdash down here on earth will be a Beis Hamikdash that is sent from heaven. Perhaps it will be that same Beis Hamikdash that we built with our mourning over Jerusalem and with the mitzvahs that we did and the coming closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But my father suggested at that time, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that it's not just the Beis Hamikdash in heaven. That is the nechama that we have now. There is a form of nechama that takes place down here on earth as well. In addition to the nechama, in addition to the consolation, because of what happens in heaven. And I would like to explain my father's thought. Now, it's very interesting, and I've mentioned this, the Baal Turim and Bereshis says that the expression Lech Lecha is mentioned twice. The expression Lech Lecha is mentioned Lech Lecha me'artzecha mimoladcha beis abicha el aretz asher areka. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when God gave the command to Avram, to Abraham, to go to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel, so he said Lech Lecha. But then there is another time that the expression Lech Lecha is mentioned. And that's at the time of the Akedah, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avram, Lech Lecha el Eretz HaMoriah, to the land of Moriah. The land of Moriah was Jerusalem, what would later become Jerusalem. And to build there an altar and to place his son Yitzchak on the altar. And we have it b'Mesorah, we have it given over in tradition that the place where Avram built the altar was the place that Adam Arishon built an altar. It's the place where Cain and Hevel gave their kabbanas. It's the place where the Beis Hamikdash, where Noach gave his karbanos. It's the place where the altar of the Beis Hamikdash in later generations will be built. So, and the Baal Turim says, why is it that Lech Lecha, that expression Lech Lecha, is mentioned twice? Because the Jewish people are going to go into exile twice. Now it seems strange that a pasuk that talks about the command to Avram to go to Eretz Yisrael, and a pasuk that talks about a command to Avram to go al Eretz HaMoriah, to Jerusalem, is used as a remez, is used as an indication for the two times that the Jewish people are going to go to exile. When we go to exile, we leave Jerusalem. When we go to exile, we leave Eretz Yisrael. So how is it that the two Lech Lechas that speak about going to Yerushalayim and going to Yerushalayim and going to Eretz Yisrael are used as an indication for the two times the Jewish people go into exile away from Yerushalayim and away from Eretz Yisrael? Now, I think the answer is very simple. That actually our trip from Yerushalayim and from Eretz Yisrael is both a trip away from Yerushalayim and away from Eretz Yisrael, as well as a trip towards Yerushalayim and towards Eretz Yisrael. And I think we can understand that if we take notice of a Gemara at the end of Makos. The Gemara at the end of Makos says, I don't have it here. Okay. The Gemara end of Makos tells us that Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues were walking, and they were going to Yerushalayim, And then they came to Harat Sophim. They came to Mount Scopus. And they saw the Makom HaMikdash. They saw the site of the Beis HaMikdash. It's brought down in the name of the Brisker Rav that tearing Kriya on the Makom HaMikdash should be done from someone standing at Mount Scopus, because there you see the Makom HaMikdash. When you're standing by the Kotel blocks the Makom HaMikdash. Okay, the seeing of the Makom HaMikdash. Person could argue, but you do see the remnant of the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, but whatever the case, but they were at Mount Scopus, Koru Big Dayhem. When they saw the place of the Makom HaMikdash, they tore their clothes, because that's the halacha. When you see the Mikdash b'churbana in its destruction, you have to tear your clothes. And when they got closer, Ro Shual Sheyotze Mi Beis Kodesh Kodashim. They saw a fox leaving the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies. Hischilu hein bochen. So the colleagues of Rabbi Akiva, they began to cry. A shua, a fox, a common fox, leaving the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, where the Kohen Gadol could only go once a year. The Rabbi Akiva Mitzachek. And Rabbi Akiva Mitzachek, I don't think it means laughing, but there was expressions of joy, smiling. Umberlo, his colleagues, were in a state of shock. Rabbi Akiva was the eternal. He receives like he was receiving encouragement from it. He was the eternal optimist. They said to him, "Why are you smiling? Why are you happy? Why are you joyful?" Why are you crying? They said to him, you must, that a foreigner, someone who's not allowed to be there, should die, it has a penalty of death. And now shualim holchubo, foxes walk over the spot. So we shouldn't cry. Below nifke. So he said to them, that's why I'm happy. Because there were two psukim said by two Nevi'im. And there seems to be a connection between these two psukim according to Rabbi Akiva. One is a pasuk from Uriah. And Uriah talks about the desolation of Yerushalayim. And the other is a pasuk in Zechariah. And the pasuk by Zechariah says that the Od Yeshu Skena V'Skena Yerushalayim, that people will live their full lives in Yerushalayim, even through and into old age. He says, Ad Shalom Niskayim Nuvaso Shaloria, so long as the prophecy of Uriah that Yerushalayim was not, that Yerushalayim will be plowed over, was not completely fulfilled. Hayisi misyare shelo tiskayim nevuaso shel Zechariah. I was fearful that the nevuah of Zechariah will not be fulfilled. But achshav sheniskayim nevuaso shel Uriah. But now that the nevuah of Uriah, that Yerushalayim will be plowed over, will be completely destroyed. B'yadua, so I know shenuvuaso shel Zechariah miskayemes, that the prophecy of Zechariah will be fulfilled. Lashon Azamrulo, Akiva Nechamtanu, Akiva Nechamtanu. They said to him, Akiva, you consoled us. Akiva, you console us. Now it's very difficult. What Rabbi Akiva said. Rabbi Akiva said to them that until the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled, that Yerushalayim will be plowed over, that will be totally destroyed. I didn't know. I was scared. That the nevuah of Zechariah will be fulfilled, will not be fulfilled. But now that the prophecy of Uriah of total destruction was fulfilled, I know that the prophecy of Zechariah, that Yerushalayim will be rebuilt. Oh, yesh v'skenim v'skenos Yerushalayim. I know that prophecy will also be fulfilled. Question, what's going on here? Rabbi Akiva, from the greatest of the Tanoim, said that he had doubts if the Beis HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt. If someone would say that today, we would say, isn't that Apikoros? This was the philosophy of the founders of the Reform movement. The first thing they did was get rid of Tfilas Musaf because they didn't believe in the Beis HaMikdash. They didn't believe in Korbanos. So how are we to understand the expression that was said by Rabbi Akiva? Hayisi misyare shelo tiskayim nivasa. But now, biyadua, now I know that it will be fulfilled. Now that it was completely destroyed, I know it will be fulfilled. I think the secret to it is the word biyadua. What does yadua mean? That I know. And I mentioned that yadua means the word yadua. We said no. The Rambam at the beginning of the Yad HaChazaka, I've mentioned this before. The Rambam beginning Yad HaChazaka says, Yisod HaYisodos v'Amud HaChochmos, the foundation of all foundations, and the foundation of all foundations, and the pillar of all knowledge. Leida, to know, Sheyeh Shamot Sarishon, there is he who was first, for whom Mamsi before any, he existed before anything. For whom Mamsi Kol Nimsad, he brought into being everything that there is. B'chol hanimtzon bein shamayim uvaretz, anything that's found between heaven and earth, and beineihem, and between them, eino ela ma'amitas himtzo, comes from the truthfulness of his existence. And everybody points out that the Rambam here uses the word leida, to know, not lahamin. In the Sefer Mitzvahs, the translator used the word lahamin, to believe. Now the truth is, Reb Chaim Heller Zatzal wrote that the Arabic word Sefer Mitzvahs was written in Arabic, has both the meaning of knowing as well as the meaning of believing. So the translator who translated it used the word lahamin, but in the Yad HaChazaka, which was written by the Rambam himself, it's leida, to know. What does it mean, leida, to know? So there are those who say that it means that if somebody is on the philosophical level, someone, according, I think I saw in the writings of Elchanan Basman, someone who is accomplished in Torah learning. So it's not enough that he believed, but he should know the proofs of God's existence. But that's a difficult explanation. My uncle explained it, Leida, that he should know that it's like the pasuk b'chol drachecha da'ehu. In all your ways, know him. What does it mean, in all your ways, know him? My uncle said, you read the newspaper, you see what's happening in the world. See the hand of God that is involved. Experience God. You see sunrise. Don't just see the sun going up. See God putting the sun up. That's Leida. Wherever you go, you encounter God. You experience God. But you have to focus. In order to experience God, you have to focus on God. You take a look at the Rambam at the end of Moreh Nevuchim. He talks about how you should focus on the presence of God with whatever you're doing. Yes, certainly tefillah, davening, kriya shema, and mitzvos. But he says even when you're doing other things, even when you're not doing anything, you're lying in bed, you have to focus on the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I think, of course, Rabbi Akiva had no doubts about the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. But Rabbi Akiva was there at the time of the Churban. And immediately after the Churban, the perspective that Rabbi Akiva had and that most Jews had was one that we're now on a trip away from Eretz Yisrael, away from Yerushalayim. Klal Yisrael was going into exile. And you can be in exile even in Eretz Yisrael. Yes, Rabbi Akiva at times was outside Eretz Yisrael. But even when he was in Eretz Yisrael, together with the other Jewish people, he was in exile. And in a sense, he saw exile at that time predominantly as a trip away. He believed, he had emunah, ani ma'amin. He believed that the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt. But he couldn't re-experience, he wasn't able to re-experience the process of the building of the Beis HaMikdash. He couldn't experience it. But then when he saw the Shul Yotzei Yerushalayim, when he saw from the Beis HaMikdash, when he saw the fox coming out, so at that point, he was able to sense, in a sense for him, the trip away from Yerushalayim was being limited. It reached its apex. And he was able to sense now the trip towards Yerushalayim, towards the building of the Beis HaMikdash. So when it says, Hayisi misyare, I was scared, Shelo tiskayim nevuaso shel Zechariah. I was scared that the prophecy of Zechariah will not be fulfilled. He meant in his life. And so long as the destruction was not complete, it was difficult for him to experience the rebuilding, because there had to be a complete destruction before it was rebuilt. But then when he saw the complete destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, and he saw He saw the Jewish people are surviving. Why did the Romans destroy the Beis HaMikdash? They destroyed the Beis HaMikdash because they thought that by destroying the Beis HaMikdash, they will destroy the allegiance that the Jewish people have to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The connection that the Jewish people had to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They had a temple-oriented attitude that unfortunately some Jews have today. They think that they only can sense the presence of God when they're in the synagogue. And the truth be told, that's why the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Because people left. People wanted to have a meeting with God. They wanted to sense the presence of God. They would go to the Beis HaMikdash. But when they left the Beis HaMikdash, they left God in the Beis HaMikdash. In a sense, the Beis HaMikdash became God's prison. So in a sense, God broke the walls of his prison. So, and the Romans sensed this, and they thought by getting rid of the Beis HaMikdash, they were able to erase the connection, long term, that the Jews had with the Beis HaMikdash, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Rabbi Akiva said until the complete destruction, he didn't know whether the nevuah, the prophecy of Uriah, will be fulfilled in his lifetime. So long as the prophecy of Uriah was not fulfilled, he didn't know if the prophecy that he will be able to experience the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash in his lifetime. So he said, "Shlo tiskayim nevuaso shel Schaya," he meant in his lifetime. Achshav sheniskayim nevuaso shel Uriah biyadua. Now I know. Now I can experience. Shenevuaso shel Schaya miskayemes. The prophecy of Schaya is being fulfilled. It's the experience of being fulfilled that he was able to say. You have consoled us, you have consoled us. But there's another point. It could be that when they were misabel, when he saw them crying, so he became happy. Why did he become happy? Because the fact that the Jewish people were crying over the Beis HaMikdash, over the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, he was able to sense its rebuilding. Kol ha'misabel al Yerushalayim zoche v'roeh b'nechamasa. If someone mourns over Jerusalem, it doesn't say yiskeh. He merits in the present tense in seeing and in feeling the consolation of Jerusalem. I was discussing this in Shul this Shabbos between Mincha and Ma'ariv, and someone that was in the Shul mentioned to me a story that Napoleon was once going with his armies, and it was on Tisha B'Av. He didn't know what Tisha B'Av was. I'm sure, unfortunately, there are some leaders in Israel that might have heard about Tisha B'Av, but don't know what it is. And he was passing by a shul, and he heard crying in the shul. And he went in, or he sent a soldier in to find out what's going on. Why is there so much crying? The Jews in America don't know how to cry. They know how to fake cry. But the Jews in Europe, who understood what Golus is, and to a larger degree had a better understanding of what the Beis HaMikdash was, they knew what crying was. They felt pain. It was a sincere cry. It wasn't a fake cry. And he was told that the Beis HaMikdash was, that they're crying over the temple that was destroyed. Napoleon didn't know what they were talking about, so he inquired further. And he was told that the Beis HaMikdash was the temple of the Jewish people that was destroyed about 1,500 years beforehand. And Napoleon said, if they're crying now, after 1,500 years, over a temple that was destroyed, that temple will be rebuilt. And we could say, to a certain degree, adding this thought, that perhaps was why Rabbi Akiva was happy, because he saw how his colleagues were crying. So he felt, and now I can experience the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. I always believed in the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, but I couldn't re-experience it. But now that I see them crying, I can re-experience. Those who mourn over Jerusalem, they merit. Rabbi Akiva was able to merit when he saw other Jews mourning over Jerusalem as well. And they said, Nichamtanu Akiva, Nichamtanu. We now have nechama, we have consolation, because Kol HaMesabel Yerushalayim, Zocha V'roa V'nechamasa. Those who won Jerusalem. And so you see that even down on earth, there is nechama. When there is nechama, when we are consoled over Jerusalem, when there is mourning over Jerusalem and over the Beis HaMikdash. Now, and there's an interesting Medrash Rabbah. The Medrash Rabbah tells a story how there was a Jew working in the fields with a cow, and a non-Jew passed by, and the cow made a noise, and the non-Jew apparently understood the noise of the cow. The cow said that the Beis HaMikdash, he told the Jew, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And he said, you have to leave from here with your cow. And either stop working, that's the way some explain it, because you're a mourner, and a mourner can't work, because when you work, you do not focus so much on the event that you're mourning, or because or you have to go to Gullus, because who knows what the Romans are going to do to you. And then the cow made another noise. When the cow made the other noise, he said, no, you don't have to leave. The Mashiach was born today. What do you mean the Mashiach was born today? But I think what it means is, this is what the Medrash Rabbah tells us, Anecha, Perek Aleph. The Medrash Rabbah is telling us that the trip toward Yerushalayim began on the day the trip away from Yerushalayim began. The trip away from Yerushalayim began on Tisha B'Av. The trip towards Yerushalayim also began on Tisha B'Av. And while we believe it, different people experience the trip towards Yerushalayim at different times. There are those that experience it. There are those that experience it like Rabbi Akiva, when he saw the total destruction of Yerushalayim. And there are those that experience it later. And there are those who can first experience it our own time. But we have to know that the trip away from Yerushalayim is simultaneously a trip towards Yerushalayim. And we have to experience it. Now the question is, why is it that this was in the news to the Jew through the non-Jew was expressed by the noise that a cow made, the moo of the cow. And some might associate it with the Egel Azov, and the second sound they might associate, of course, it's very difficult because the paraduma couldn't have been tied or anything. Okay, whatever, couldn't have done work, can be a cow. But what's the idea behind the cow? And I think the idea behind the cow is what the Palgemayim. Palgemayim was a Perush Necha written by the Nesivos. I mentioned it. In regard to the pasuk, Lo mipi elyon teitze haros v'hatov, not from the mouth of on high does the ros, the bad in the plural form, and the tov in the singular form come out. And the Palgemayim is troubled. Why is it that ros, the bad things, is in the plural form, and tov is in the singular form? And the Palgemayim says something very interesting. He says the bad that happens does not come from God himself, even though there are psukim that seem to indicate that. But what it is that God withdraws to a certain degree when we do bad. Sometimes God is a Shomer Yisrael, and sometimes he's Roa Min HaChalonos. He looks. We talk about Hest upon him. God is hidden. I should say the Torah talks about Hest upon him. God withdraws. And when God withdraws, so nature to a certain degree takes its own course. And when nature takes its own course, especially in regard to the Jewish people, so we encounter trouble. Because the natural disposition of the Umos Olam, of the nations of the world, halacha she'esav sones Yaakov, it's a law. It's a law of nature that when there is no interference from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalseinu b'HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzileinu miyadam, it's only God's interference with the natural courses of events that saves us. When nature takes its own course, the Jewish people encounter trouble, tragedy. In a sense, a human being has to a certain degree of control over nature. Man, because of his mind, but an animal is subject to the laws of nature almost completely. The drives of nature, the instincts of nature. To tell us that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, that the Jewish people are going into Golus, you better run away. Because to a certain degree, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has withdrawn. Because we refuse to recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We left HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Beis HaMikdash. We didn't want him to leave the Beis HaMikdash, but we wanted to leave the Beis HaMikdash. So we were subject to the laws of nature. But then when the cow made another cry and he said Mashiach was born, doesn't mean literally he was born today. It means that the trip back to Yerushalayim began. What was that? Because even though God made us subject to the laws of nature, but there's a Tanai Hisna HaKadosh Baruch Hu, part of nature is that the Jewish people will never be destroyed. Even when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is hest upon him, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mashgiach min hachalonos. He's constantly watching. And part of the laws of nature that would otherwise dictate that after 1,800 years of exile, the Jewish nation should have come to an end, like all the nations of the world. The Jewish people, whatever tragedy happens, whatever event happens, ultimately there will be the redemption. The laws of nature do not have power to allow the destruction of the Jewish people. And the whole Chad Gadya talks about the end of days. It's figurative for the nations that try to destroy the Jewish people. And one destroys another and another and another. The nations fight among themselves. But ultimately, we have Tchias HaMesim. Ultimately, we have Mashiach. Ultimately, we have the death of the Malach HaMaves. And this is, I think, so the Tisha B'Av, the other fast days will be holidays when Mashiach comes. Tisha B'Av is a holiday now, not just because more than any of the others, it's a day of Avelis. And Kol HaMisabel Yerushalayim Zoche V'Ro V'Nechamasa. But also, and that's part of it, the trip back from exile began when the trip to exile began. So it's right now, yes, we're Misabel, when we have Avelis, we're able to sense the trip towards Yerushalayim. So that's why it's a yontif. It's a yontif because we recognize that it's a trip towards Eretz Yisrael and towards Yerushalayim as well. Now, it's interesting that the Gemara discusses what is the Gemara discusses what is the laning. What is the laning of Tisha B'Av? What is the laning of Tisha B'Av? And all kinds about the Meraglim, also also about the klolos, the tochacha, different opinions. But can we rate Kisolit Banim, which is part of the Sedra of this week? And it's very interesting, and that seemed to be a later opinion. That opinion isn't even mentioned beforehand. And why we read Kisolit Banim? Because Kisolit Banim, that's in this week's Sedra. It's almost like Tisha B'Av. Of course, there was laning also about the Meraglim in this week's Sedra. But it's almost like the laning that we choose of Tisha B'Av is a laning, is preparing us for Shabbos. Very strange. Mishnah, I think, says the Tochacha. So Tisha B'Av somehow is preparing us for Shabbos. We choose a laning that has to do with the laning of this week's Sedra. It's like Monday and Thursday. We lane for the coming Shabbos to Sedra. But I think that we could suggest that the reason is, as I mentioned, that the idea of the Beis HaMikdash being destroyed was because the Jewish people, in a sense, they left God in the Beis HaMikdash. They left God in the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash became the prison of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in a sense, and when you take a look, you become antiquated in the land. You become old in the land. It's not something new. You take everything for granted. You leave everything to nature. You're not on guard. What the Palgei Mayim said, there are two roles. There are two bad things. One bad is the bad we do. That doesn't come from God. That comes from us. We have freedom of will. But then there's another bad, and that is as a result of our sins. As a result of our sins, the bad that happens is not from God. That's from the withdrawal of God. However, when it comes to Tov, the good that we do, that was by our free will, the mitzvahs that we fulfilled. That was ours. It wasn't God. God gave us freedom of will. But the reward, the more good that we do, the mitzvahs that we do, the more HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes involved in the world. The more HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervenes for us. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu does himself. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is involved in. Tov, there's only one type of Tov that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't do. That's the Tov that we do. But the Tov that happens to us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. The Ra that we do, and the Ra, the bad that happens to us as a result, that's not done by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's done by HaKadosh Baruch Hu being withdrawn from the world to a certain degree, and he is withdrawn from the world because of our Ma'asim Rayim, because of our sins. A little bit like the Mabul where HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Lo yodun ruchi, my spirit cannot be with man. So, in a sense, so when we nishantim baritz, we come antiquated in the land. We're used to things happening by very nature. So we think everything will be good. And because we leave everything up to nature, and we refuse to recognize God's involvement, so there's a withdrawal from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So immediately after Tisha B'Av, after we recognize, as a result of the avelus that we did, the sensing of the fact that we're on a trip back to Yerushalayim. So we have the Shiva de Nechemta, the 7 weeks of Nechama, immediately afterwards. The avelus comes to an end with the end of Tisha B'Av. When somebody dies, you have first the Shiva, then you have the Shloshim, then you have the Shana. But when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, to the Churban, first you have the 3 weeks. That's like the avelus of Shana. That's compared to the avelus, the mourning somebody has when his parents die for a year. And then you have the 9 days. That's like the mourning. That's like the mourning of Shloshim. And Tisha B'Av is like Shiva in the opposite order. Why? Because after we go through Tisha B'Av and we realize through the morning that Kol HaMesabel Yerushalayim Zocha B'Ro B'Nechamasa, we have to immediately go and proceed further on that path back to Yerushalayim. The focus is on the path back to Yerushalayim. So all the avelus is before Tisha B'Av, not after Tisha B'Av, in the opposite order. Why? Because afterwards we're emphasizing our trip towards Yerushalayim, towards Tshuva, as I mentioned last week, towards Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim, 7 weeks. And then you have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim where we do Tshuva and we come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu again. And the morning beforehand is recognition of the fact that we're not just mourning over the Beis HaMikdash, but we're mourning over the cause of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, which happened before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. It's because of the way we acted, because we tried to make the Beis HaMikdash the prison of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So to a certain sense, HaKadosh Baruch Hu broke free. And Tisha B'Av prepares us for Shabbos, because what's the difference? The Tushas Levi, my uncle and his Shiurim also said the same thing. What is the difference between Yontif and Shabbos? Yontif, the Jewish people go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yontif, the Jewish people, Wola LaRegel, they went to the Beis HaMikdash. And according to Tushas Levi, we proclaim the Yontif, Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. We sanctify, God sanctifies the Jewish people who sanctify the times. But the Shabbos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to us. We do Kabbalah Shabbos. We receive God. God comes to our houses. God comes to our shuls. And when we go to Golos, the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. We're limited in our ability to go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu until the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt in the hair of the Yameinu, and we look forward to that happening. But we're not cut off from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to us. But as the Kutzker said, I was once told that where is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, wherever you let him in. If we open the doors of our house to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if we open the doors of our shuls to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if we make sure that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is constantly there with us, then we'll be so to be able to go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Beis HaMikdash also. And I want to suggest that today is the yahrzeit of my mother, a blessed memory. When it comes to a house, to a home, the woman of the home, she enabled my father, she enabled us to be involved in Torah learning. She made many sacrifices, but to a large degree, the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the house and the home. You can't have HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a house. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to be part of a home. And the spirit of the home and the spirit that allowed HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be in the home is created to a large degree by the woman of the home. And my mother did that. And there's another thing I want to mention, that my mother, for a while, my parents owned a house in Yerushalayim. From time to time, they would go, not Yerushalayim, in Eretz Yisrael, actually in Ramat Beit Shemesh. And my mother insisted when they bought that house, she insisted that it have a garden. And why did she insist that it have a garden? She insisted to have a garden because she said, when Mashiach comes, she wants to be able to take the fruit to be Kurim to Yerushalayim. You know, we have a lot of people that talk. They talk about Mashiach coming, but they're really not feeling the coming of Mashiach. My mother was feeling the coming of Mashiach. She was on a trip, not just a trip away from Yerushalayim. She was born in Lithuania, and then she was in Eretz Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael was always part of her soul. But she was on a trip back to Yerushalayim as well. She was focusing on bringing the Bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash. And her memory should serve as an inspiration to all of us, to her students, to her family, and to all who knew her, to remember that when we on this trip away from Yerushalayim, we have to see it not just a trip away from Yerushalayim, but it's a trip towards Yerushalayim and towards the Beis HaMikdash. Okay.
If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat.
I know.